my 30s a difficult slot because you've all had a hard day working and now you're in the bar and you want a beer and you want some chips and sausages, and so this might seem rather boring to you, but I'll try and make it as unboring as possible. I'm of a certain age, and when I was your age there were bands around like the Sex Pistols, and I have one thing in common with the Sex Pistols: the university has censored me on a number of occasions for the use of the word shit, and one was in a talk that I did called no, I've just forgotten the name of the talk that I did, but I wanted to mention that particular word. And then tonight's talk, I wanted, instead of why talk about sustainable food production is largely hokum, I wanted to say largely bullshit. The reason why I wanted to do that was because I'm of also a certain age where men have midlife crises, and I'm currently having a midlife crisis, and so this next 20 minutes is going to be a bit of autotherapy with regard to my life over the last 20 years, some of the things I've done and why I now feel quite disillusioned about some of these things. So first of all, who am I? My name's Sean Beer. I left school at 18, worked on farms milking cows before I went to university to study agriculture. Upon leaving university, I won a scholarship to study in New Zealand and returned to the UK to take up teaching in agriculture. And I had a real concern about food and the environment. So for the last 20 years, I've been an environmental campaigner, particularly with regard to local food. All things I've done to look at the food supply chain and how the food supply chain affects us. Because at the moment, some of you are sitting there putting stuff in your mouths, and if I came along to you and said, excuse me, do you mind if I stick my fingers in your mouth, you would call a copper, but you're quite happy just to sit there putting things in your mouth without a second thought. So maybe we should think a little bit more carefully about the food, where it goes, and David is now pushing his plate away from him. So why do I think that talk about sustainable food production is hokum? The first reason why I think it's hokum is we can't even agree on what a definition of sustainable actually means. I like the UN's idea of sustainability, which is all about the triple bottom line: sustainability of the environment, economic sustainability, and social sustainability. The environmental movement, or the green blob of those, as they've recently been called, likes to hijack the word sustainability, so to look at it purely from an environmental perspective. I think that's wrong. We need to look at it from a social perspective and also an economic perspective as well. There's a real danger in perceiving everything just from an environmental perspective. Of course, if we screw up the world will eradicate the whole human race and will presumably start again. That's the idea of the Gaia principle. So we can't even agree on the idea of what sustainability actually is. The second reason why I am now increasingly having trouble with sustainability and the ideas of sustainability is that it's all too simple. I've campaigned in terms of food and local food for the last 20 years. I was a member of the board of directors of Dorset Food Links. We helped set up and run 11 farmers' markets. I started local food halls at several agricultural shows. I used to go around doing cookery demonstrations, promoting local food, and I've also worked to save 2 breeds of livestock in this country. So for me to go back and say that some of our ideas are too simple, what do I mean? We'll take the idea of food miles. Food miles is a very good marketing concept because everybody gets the idea. It's about how far your food has travelled. And it's been very good for the environmental movement and the local food movement. The point is, food miles is a meaningless term. All it means is that your food has travelled a certain number of miles. It doesn't say how efficiently that food has travelled, how much its travel and its production has impacted on the environment. So you might say it's a good idea to buy local lamb as opposed to lamb from New Zealand. But that lamb from New Zealand has travelled those 12,000 miles in a ship along with 500,000 other lamb chops, say. So the actual carbon impact of that New Zealand lamb in studies has been shown to be potentially much lower than the carbon impact of lamb produced in this country. So why do environmentalists whinge on about shipping something like lamb over from New Zealand? Also, we have to think about the type of food that we eat, and it's more complicated than you think. If we eat beef and we eat lamb, one of the things that sheep and cattle do is they belch and fart a lot. Now, you mightn't think that's a big problem unless you're actually caught behind a cow when it decides to let rip. However, the methane produced by those animals is up to 24 times greater in its impact in terms of global warming than carbon dioxide. And so in eating ruminant animals like lamb and beef, maybe there's a real extra problem about consuming that meat because of the impact it has on the environment. Of course, you could eat beef and you could eat chicken or pork, but if you eat chicken and pork, then you're eating animals that have largely been fed on food that we could eat, like wheat and barley. And of course, soya. And soya underpins a lot of our non-meat diets, such as vegetarian and vegan diets. But we don't grow soya in this country, we ship soya all around the world. So you step back and think about it, and it's slightly more complicated than it first appears. The third reason really why I'm worried about the sustainability of food production and the talk that goes on around it relates to the fact that what we're doing at the moment in terms of sustainable food production just isn't enough. It's window dressing. For example, the farmers' markets that I help set up largely sell premium-priced food products to middle-class people who like to shop at Waitrose. And you can tell that by going to a farmer's market, because everyone's walking around with those little green Waitrose bags that we were given a few years ago. It's not really supplying food for people to eat. It's a privileged group of people who are buying luxuries. Also, they're not farmers' markets, because most of the people selling at the markets aren't farmers. We could better call them local food producers' markets. I remember speaking to one lady about a recipe that I was developing for her for some horseradish sauce. And she said, yes, I'll try this recipe. She's based in Dorset, this person was. Next time I go to the wholesaler in Bristol, where I buy all my other ingredients, I can buy the ingredients and then I can try this. So how local was the food that she was actually producing and selling at a premium through these markets? I'm a little bit cynical about it. In America, the markets are often slightly different in that farmers are actually coming to the towns and connecting directly to people. In Britain, it's different. It's more of a middle-class indulgence. So we're not doing enough. So why aren't we doing enough? Well, one reason why we're not doing enough is that things have gone too far. The supply chains that we've now developed take food from all over the world to bring it here to satisfy our need for protein and carbohydrates. We've got rid of aspects of local food supply. We've got rid of small abattoirs. We've geared up in a supermarket system where the supply of food is controlled by large multinational retailers, and basically you eat what you're told to eat. And there lies the other problem. You don't care. You actually don't give a toss what goes in your mouth. And that's one of the things that really worries me, because you're quite happy to sit there and stuff things in your mouth and not bat an eyelid. Meanwhile, things are happening in the food supply chain, and when it all goes bad, you all get worried. So 12 months ago, we had a little problem because some of our beef was contaminated with horse meat. And at the time, people threw up their hands in angst that they were being fed something like horse. Now, I would quite happily eat horse if I knew what it was. I don't like eating beef when it's actually horse. That's an issue of trust. But 12 months ago, terrible angst. And what happened? Well, the supermarket said, let's supply British beef because it's nice and trustworthy and people will eat it. What's happened now? Well, farmers geared up to supply a lot more beef. They've supplied that. Many supermarkets have gone now and are sourcing beef that's not from the UK. There's an oversupply of beef. The price has fallen. That's not economically sustainable. It's not socially sustainable for communities in rural areas that would like their children to be able to go to the local school. And ultimately, it's not environmentally sustainable either. So the long and the short of it really is sustainability of food supply. I worked and have worked for 20 years trying to encourage the consumption of local food and trying to get people to think more about the food that they eat. I've actually done things. I've not just talked about things. I've gone out even when it wasn't trendy for academics to engage with the public and done things like cooked for people, shown them how they can use local food. And now I've got to a stage in my life where I look back at a lot of the things that I've done and realise that it's just been window dressing. And the thing that worries me is about your futures and the futures of my two daughters who've just gone off to university. You can tell that because of the lack of hair and also the very thin wallet that I now have as they disappear off in different directions. What will your food be like? What will their food be like? And actually, do you care? Thank you very much.